Two boys walked into a forest during a storm and vanished without a trace. 11 years later, a logger's machine struck something buried deep underground, and what they found changed everything anyone thought they knew about that day. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. And here's a question for you. If you stumbled upon something buried in the woods, would you report it or walk away? Let me know in the comments. July 12th, 1997. The sky over Oak Haven State Forest was turning an ugly shade of purple, and it wasn't even close to sunset yet. Inside the Kinsley house, right on the edge of all those trees, Myra Kinsley kept checking the clock. Her sons, 13-year-old Ronan and 11-year-old Jarek, should have been home by now. They'd spent the afternoon at their Boy Scout meeting, just a routine get-together in a clearing inside the forest. The meeting ended hours ago. By this point, those boys should have been tearing through the kitchen looking for snacks. Ronan was the responsible one. You could spot him a mile away in his tan scout shirt and dark shorts, blonde hair perfectly parted. Jarek was quieter, more watchful. He wore the olive-green long-sleeved version of the uniform, and he had this unique circular pendant hanging from a red cord around his neck. The brothers were inseparable. They shared this intense fascination with the wilderness that started right at their back door. Myra mentioned to her husband Finian that the boys were running late. At first, neither of them was too worried. Maybe the meeting went long. Maybe they stopped at a friend's place. But as another half hour crawled by, something in the house started to shift. The windows began rattling. The wind was picking up fast, making this low moaning sound that put everyone on edge. Finian stepped outside to check, and what he found wasn't good. The temperature had plummeted. The air smelled metallic, heavy, like something bad was coming. The trees along their property line were thrashing around violently. This wasn't going to be some gentle summer rain. This was a full-blown storm rolling in fast, and if the boys were still out there, they were completely exposed. The panic hit hard and fast. Myra started making calls, first to the scoutmaster, who confirmed the meeting had wrapped up around 3:30. He'd even taken a group photo earlier that day, catching the boys standing on a dirt path holding their wide-brimmed hats. But he hadn't seen Ronan or Jarek since everyone dispersed. Other parents said the same thing. The Kinsley brothers had seemingly disappeared the moment the meeting ended. The rain started coming down in sheets, and Myra and Finian made the call no parent ever wants to make. They contacted the sheriff's department and officially reported their sons missing. Deputies arrived quickly, their lights cutting through the storm, but they couldn't do much. Visibility was almost zero. The wind and rain made it nearly impossible to communicate. They needed information, a starting point. That's when they talked to Wesley Prather, a close friend of the brothers. Wesley told them something crucial. Ronan and Jarek weren't planning to come straight home. They'd recently found a hidden cave deep in a less traveled part of the forest. They were treating it like their secret headquarters, and they'd planned to head back into the woods right after the meeting to explore it some more. Wesley hadn't gone with them. He'd noticed the darkening sky and the rising wind and decided to head home instead. He remembered trying to convince the Kinsley brothers to do the same, but Ronan had insisted they'd be fine. Wesley watched them walk away, disappearing back into the trees, while everyone else headed to the parking lot. This gave authorities a destination, but it was a terrifying one. The cave was miles from the meeting point, deep in the wilderness. If the boys had tried to hike there, they would have been caught in the worst of the storm. The authorities figured the brothers were either seeking shelter in the cave or had suffered an accident in the brutal conditions. But knowing where they might be and actually reaching them were two completely different things. The storm raged all night. For Myra and Finian, sleep was impossible. They could only watch the clock and imagine what their sons might be going through out there. Oak Haven State Forest covered thousands of acres. It was easy to get lost in daylight. In the middle of a tempest like this, it was a death trap. At first light on July 13th, the search operation kicked into high gear. Local law enforcement, state police, park rangers, and hundreds of volunteers flooded the area. The trailhead parking lot turned into a command center. The wind had died down enough for searchers to finally enter the woods, but what they found was devastating. The storm had completely reshaped the landscape. Trails that had been clear paths the day before were now blocked with debris. Massive trees had been ripped out of the ground, their root systems exposed like skeletal hands reaching up from the earth. Creeks that were normally ankle-deep had transformed into raging torrents. The ground was thick, sucking mud that made every step exhausting. The search focused on the area between the scout meeting point and the cave location. Wesley, despite everything he was going through, went with a team of trackers to guide them. The journey was brutal. The terrain leading to the cave was already rugged, full of rocky outcrops and dense brush. The storm damage made it 10 times worse. Searchers called out the boys' names, but the sound just got swallowed by the wet foliage. They used ropes to cross flooded areas and chainsaws to clear paths. The first day turned up nothing. When darkness fell, the teams had to retreat. The temperature dropped again, adding hypothermia to the list of dangers the boys faced if they were still alive out there. The second day, July 14th, the search continued with even more intensity. Specialized teams with climbing gear and mapping technology pushed deeper into the remote areas Wesley had described. Late in the afternoon on that second day, they finally found it. A cave matching Wesley's description, tucked into a remote ravine. But the entrance was partially blocked by a landslide of mud and rock triggered by the heavy rains. The sight immediately crushed everyone's spirits. It was hard to access, and the surrounding area showed clear evidence of violent water movement. Investigators carefully entered the cave. It was damp, cold, and smelled like wet earth. They were looking for any sign that the boys had actually made it this far. The cave floor was covered in fresh silt, making it almost impossible to find footprints or dropped items. The search seemed hopeless until one of the trackers noticed something near the entrance. It wasn't a piece of clothing or a belonging. It was a knot. Tied to an exposed root near the cave opening was a length of red cord, identical to the kind used in Boy Scout uniforms. The cord had been fashioned into a complex, intricate knot. It was immediately recognized as a specialized scouting knot, one that junior members typically didn't know. Wesley was brought over to look at it. His reaction was instant. He confirmed this specific knot, a variation of a friction hitch, was something Ronan had only recently mastered. Ronan had been incredibly proud of this skill, practicing it constantly and showing it off. According to Wesley, Ronan was probably the only boy in their troop who could tie it correctly under pressure. The discovery of that knot changed everything. It strongly suggested the Kinsley brothers had reached their destination shortly before the storm hit its peak. Maybe Ronan left it as a marker, or maybe he was just practicing while waiting for the rain to start. But why they left the cave, or what happened next, remained a complete mystery. The physical evidence inside told a grim story. Along with the silt on the floor, investigators noticed debris wedged high on the cave walls, several feet above their heads. This was a high water mark, clear proof the cave had experienced significant sudden flooding during the storm. The ravine outside had acted like a funnel, channeling all that torrential runoff directly into the opening. The theory started to solidify, and it was heartbreaking. Authorities believed the boys had been caught in a flash flood inside the cave. The force of the water would have been overwhelming. The alternative was only slightly less horrible. Maybe they saw the water rising and tried to flee, only to become lost and disoriented in the wilderness during the worst of the storm. The discovery of the knot focused the search, but it didn't make things easier. The search area expanded significantly around the cave. divers searched the swollen creeks and temporary ponds created by the floodwaters. Cadaver dogs crisscrossed the terrain. The community rallied with an intensity born from shared grief and desperate hope. Weeks dragged on. The summer heat returned, baking the mud dry. Media attention gradually faded. The number of volunteers dwindled. Despite the most exhaustive search operation in the region's history, no further trace of Ronan or Jarek was found. No clothing, no equipment, nothing. It was like the storm had simply erased them. The investigation eventually stalled. There were no suspects, no signs of foul play. The knot at the cave entrance was seen as the last artifact of a tragic accident. For Myra and Finian, the uncertainty was torture. They held memorials without bodies, clinging to faint hope. The case was officially declared cold, categorized as a tragic accident. Two adventurous boys caught in nature's fury. The forest kept its secrets, and the story became a local legend, a cautionary tale told around campfires. 11 years passed. The narrative shifts to October 2008. Oak Haven State Forest remained largely unchanged, a massive expanse of wilderness. The story of the Kinsley brothers had faded into local folklore, a tragic footnote. But economic pressures led the state to open new sections of the forest for logging. One area, deep in the woods and miles beyond, where searchers had looked in 1997, was being actively harvested. The noise was deafening. Heavy machinery tore through the dense woodland, chainsaws roared. Garrick Vane was operating a feller buncher, a massive machine designed to cut and gather trees simultaneously. He was experienced, used to the rhythms of the forest, but on this particular afternoon, clearing a dense patch of underbrush near a natural depression, his machine hit something that didn't yield. It wasn't the dull thud of a buried rock or the resistance of roots. It was a sharp, ringing clang, metal on metal. Garrick stopped the machine and climbed down to investigate. The object was buried under thick layers of topsoil, pine needles, and decaying leaves. It looked intentionally camouflaged, covered with brush and debris that had built up over years. He kicked at the dirt, exposing a section of rusted metal. It looked like a flat sheet, maybe corrugated iron. He called over some colleagues. Together they cleared away the dirt and brush with shovels, gradually revealing what was beneath. It wasn't a sheet of metal. It was a hatch, a large square metal hatch, heavily rusted and pitted. It was set into a larger structure buried deep in the earth. The discovery was unsettling. This area was remote, miles from any human habitation. There was no reason for a buried structure to be here. At first, they thought maybe it was an old septic tank or a forgotten root cellar, but the location made no sense. Garrick tried to lift the hatch. It was heavy, and the hinges were seized with rust. Using a crowbar, they managed to pry it open. The hatch groaned, revealing a dark opening leading down into the earth. A stale, musty smell drifted up from the darkness, the scent of decay, mold, and damp earth. They peered inside. They couldn't see much, but the shape was becoming clear. It wasn't a tank or a cellar. It was a shipping container, deliberately buried in the ground. A heated debate broke out. Garrick's colleagues urged him to ignore it. They were already behind schedule, and involving authorities would mean shutting down the operation for days. The delay would cost them money, and their boss wasn't forgiving about missed deadlines. They argued it was probably just an old survivalist bunker or a hunter's cache, not their business. But Garrick was a father. The sight of that buried container, the darkness inside, the deliberate concealment, filled him with unease. Something felt deeply wrong. The effort required to bury something this large in such a remote location was significant. It felt hidden, like a secret that needed to be exposed. He made his decision. Ignoring the protests, he decided to report it. The isolation meant no cell service. Garrick had to drive his truck several miles down rough logging roads until he reached a spot with a signal. The drive felt agonizingly long. He finally got a signal and called the county sheriff's office, describing what they'd found. The sheriff's department recognized how unusual this was and dispatched deputies to the scene. They arrived hours later. The logging operation was halted. The area became a potential crime scene. Deputies began excavating around the container. It was massive, requiring the logging equipment to clear the earth that had encased it for years. As the dirt was removed, the full scale was revealed. A 40-foot shipping container buried in a deep trench. The entire surface was covered in thick layers of rust. Patches of bright green moss had taken root on top, cementing its age and neglect. The scene was grim. A rusting sarcophagus unearthed from the forest floor. Investigators equipped with flashlights and protective gear cautiously climbed down into the darkness. The interior was a scene of decay and abandonment. It was clearly a makeshift living space, but it hadn't been occupied in years. The air was thick and foul, difficult to breathe. Flashlights revealed a horrific scene. 2 decaying mattresses lay on the floor, covered in mold and droppings. The floor was littered with debris. Empty food wrappers, crushed aluminum cans, plastic bottles. The packaging styles and logos suggested they dated back to the late 90s or early 2000s. The volume indicated long-term habitation. Someone had lived here for an extended period, but it was the nature of the items that shifted everything from unsettling to horrifying. Scattered among the debris were things that didn't fit an adult survivalist. Comic book issues, warped and stained, dating from 1997. Portable CD player, heavily corroded, lying near a mattress with CDs scattered nearby. Bands popular among teenagers in that era. The items suggested young occupants. The realization sent a chill through the team. The container was searched methodically, every item cataloged and photographed. The conditions were appalling, hazardous, due to mold and rust. They were working under the assumption this might be a crime scene, but they had no context, no missing persons reports that matched. Then, in the decaying fabric of one mattress, an investigator noticed a glint of metal. He carefully retrieved it. A small circular metal pendant attached to a faded, frayed red cord. The pendant was tarnished, but its unique design was still visible. The object was processed, and its description entered into the state's missing persons database. The search parameters were broad, looking for any unsolved disappearances involving similar items. The process was painstaking, requiring review of hundreds of cold case files. The system returned a match. The pendant matched an item described in a missing persons report filed 11 years earlier. The report detailed the disappearance of Ronan and Jarek Kinsley in Oak Haven State Forest in July 1997. The report specifically mentioned Jarek wearing a unique circular pendant on a red cord when he vanished. A photograph from the file, taken by the scoutmaster on the day they disappeared, showed Jarek wearing the exact same pendant. The realization hit like a physical blow. The buried container, the comic books, the mattresses. It all suddenly made horrific sense. They hadn't found a hunter's cache. They'd found the place where the Kinsley brothers had been taken. The discovery transformed everything. This was no longer a local matter. The county sheriff immediately contacted the FBI. The cold case had just exploded wide open. Within 24 hours, the remote logging site became a major crime scene. FBI agents arrived, securing the scene and taking control from local authorities. The silence of the forest was replaced by generators and crackling radios. The Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted immediately. The nature of this discovery, a hidden underground bunker designed for long-term captivity, pointed toward a specific type of offender, someone with meticulous planning, patience, and terrifying organization. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was carefully orchestrated. The first priority was analyzing the site itself. The container was photographed extensively. It was immediately clear this wasn't hastily constructed. It was a prison, designed and built with chilling premeditation. The container had been significantly modified before burial. Investigators discovered a sophisticated custom-built ventilation system. This was the most striking feature, revealing meticulous planning and technical expertise. It wasn't just a simple air pipe. It was a complex network of buried ducts, specialized fans, and filters designed to circulate air while remaining concealed from the surface. The intake and exhaust vents were located hundreds of feet away, hidden in dense brush. The system was intricate, suggesting high technical skill and knowledge of HVAC systems. The hatch had been reinforced with heavy steel bars and secured with multiple locking mechanisms. These weren't standard locks. They were custom-made restraints designed specifically to prevent escape from inside. There was no way for anyone inside to open the hatch without specialized tools. Ronan and Jarek had been held captive here, buried alive in darkness. The logistics were staggering. Burying a 40-foot shipping container in such a remote location required significant premeditation and heavy equipment. Excavators, bulldozers, maybe even a crane. It wasn't something that could be done quickly or quietly. It meant the perpetrator had access to the area and the means to operate machinery without drawing suspicion. Forensic teams began searching the container for evidence: DNA, fingerprints, hair, any trace evidence that could identify the perpetrator or confirm the victim's presence beyond the pendant. The work was slow, conducted under portable lights, the air thick with decay and biohazards. But the environment proved to be a forensic nightmare. Years of moisture, fluctuating temperatures, rust, and mold had degraded any biological evidence. Surfaces were covered in grime, making fingerprint recovery impossible. Mattresses and clothing were so decayed that any DNA had broken down. Despite advanced techniques, the site was forensically barren. The perpetrator had hidden the crime scene, and time had sterilized it. The discovery shattered the long-held theory that the brothers died in an accident. The storm, once seen as the cause, was now viewed as tragic coincidence. The chaos it caused had likely aided the abductor, providing cover and erasing tracks. The investigation shifted. If the boys were abducted, how did the perpetrator transport them deep into the forest and bury them in a pre-prepared prison without detection? The answer lay in the heavy machinery. Investigators researched the land's history. Records revealed that while the area was state-owned, it had been leased in the mid-90s to a small, independent aggregate company. The company specialized in quarrying stone and gravel, operations that involved heavy equipment. This lease provided a plausible explanation. Someone might have had access and justification to operate excavators and bulldozers without drawing suspicion. The noise from quarrying would have masked the activity of burying the container. Authorities theorized the perpetrator was likely connected to this company. The investigation now faced tracking down individuals associated with the defunct operation, hoping to find a connection to the buried prison and the two boys held captive inside. The aggregate company's lease provided the first concrete lead. The timeline matched. The company was active in the mid-90s, around when the container was prepared and the boys disappeared. The logistics aligned. They had the equipment necessary. The investigation pivoted, focusing on anyone associated with the operation. The company had gone out of business in the early 2000s, and records were incomplete and disorganized. Compiling a list of former employees, contractors, and management was arduous, requiring scattered paperwork, tax records, and permits. As they dug deeper, a murky picture emerged. Interviews with former employees and locals revealed the company had a reputation for cutting corners and operating on the fringes of legality. They disregarded environmental regulations, and there were persistent rumors they used the leased land for illegal dumping, burying hazardous materials to avoid disposal fees. The remote location and lack of oversight provided perfect cover. This led to a new theory. Maybe the abduction wasn't the primary motive. Investigators hypothesized the Kinsley brothers, exploring near the cave, might have stumbled upon the illegal dumping operation in progress. Workers, fearing exposure, might have panicked and silenced the boys, using the shipping container, perhaps already on site for storing equipment, as a temporary holding cell or tomb. This theory gained traction. It seemed straightforward. It aligned with the company's shady practices. The motive shifted from predation to crime cover-up. The investigation focused on the company's foreman from 1997. He had a significant criminal record, including assault charges. He was known for his volatile temper and willingness to use intimidation. Former employees described him as ruthless, unpredictable, capable of violence, and motivated to protect illegal activities. He seemed like the prime suspect. Locating him took weeks. He'd moved to another state, living a transient lifestyle, working odd construction jobs. FBI agents tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. The interrogation was aggressive. Agents confronted him with the buried container and the boy's disappearance. They pressured him about the company's activities, suggesting the boys had seen something they shouldn't have. They painted him as a man desperate to protect his livelihood, willing to do anything to cover up his crimes. He was defiant at first, denying knowledge of the container or the boys. He dismissed illegal dumping allegations as rumors from disgruntled employees. But as the interrogation wore on and agents hinted at federal charges for environmental crimes, his demeanor changed. He eventually admitted to illegal dumping. He confessed the company had routinely buried barrels of toxic waste on the leased land, saving millions. He even provided details about burial site locations, resigned to legal consequences. But when questioned about the Kinsley brothers, he vehemently denied involvement. He insisted he'd never seen them and had no knowledge of their disappearance. His denial seemed genuine, his frustration palpable, and critically, he provided a detailed, verifiable alibi for the day of the abduction. He claimed he was at an equipment auction in a neighboring county, hours from Oak Haven Forest. Investigators were skeptical. The timing seemed too convenient. They meticulously checked his alibi, pulling financial records, hotel receipts, interviewing auction witnesses. The evidence was conclusive. The alibi held up. Transaction records and gas station purchases confirmed his presence. Witnesses corroborated his story. The timeline made it virtually impossible for him to be involved. The former foreman was cleared. The collapse of the aggregate company theory was a major setback. The investigation was back to square one. A buried prison, 2 missing boys, no viable suspects. Frustration was immense. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit urged investigators to refocus on evidence found inside the container. The BAU emphasized the items found: mattresses, CD player, comic books, long-term food supply, suggested a captivity scenario with a caretaker dynamic. This was fundamentally inconsistent with a quick crime cover-up. If the boys had been killed to silence them, perpetrators would likely have disposed of bodies quickly. They wouldn't have set up a long-term living space with food, entertainment, and bedding. The evidence pointed toward a solitary abductor, a predator who planned meticulously and intended to keep the boys captive long-term. The aggregate company's forest activity wasn't the source of the crime, but the cover. The perpetrator likely used the noise, disruption, and machinery presence to conceal his activities. The investigation shifted toward identifying this solitary abductor, a shadow figure operating undetected within the quarrying chaos. With traditional avenues exhausted, investigators returned to physical evidence. focusing on the unique modifications to the container. The ventilation system was the most distinctive feature. It wasn't standard, off the shelf. It was custom-built to provide adequate airflow while remaining hidden. It used specific high-grade industrial components, specialized inline fans, HEPA filters, heavy-duty ductwork not typically available to the public or standard workers. These were designed for industrial applications requiring high reliability, the kind used in specialized HVAC systems in commercial buildings, hospitals, industrial facilities. This indicated the perpetrator had specialized knowledge and access. Investigators decided to trace the ventilation part's origin, hoping to identify the purchaser. They contacted the manufacturer of the fans and filters, identified by serial numbers still visible. The manufacturer cooperated, providing a list of regional distributors who sold these components in the mid-90s. Tracing sales records from over a decade earlier was daunting. Many distributors had closed or purged old records, but one large industrial supply company still maintained archived sales records on microfilm, requiring painstaking manual review. The process took weeks. Analysts reviewed thousands of transactions, focusing on cash sales or small orders, transactions not easily traceable. They were looking for anyone who purchased these components in the period before the brothers' disappearance, searching for a needle in a haystack. The search yielded hundreds of transactions. Investigators cross-referenced sales with individuals known to have Oak Haven Forest access, but who weren't direct aggregate company employees. They were looking for someone operating on the periphery, someone who might have gone unnoticed. A match was found. A cash transaction for 2 specialized inline fans and several HEPA filters, dated March 1997, 4 months before the abduction. The purchaser provided a name but no company affiliation. The name was Orson Blythe. Investigators ran a background check. The results were immediate and alarming. Blythe was a solitary HVAC specialist. He operated his own small business, specializing in complex HVAC systems. He had the knowledge and skills to design and build the ventilation system. Furthermore, Blythe was connected to the Oak Haven area. He worked as a subcontractor, occasionally hired by the aggregate company for specialized maintenance on heavy equipment climate control. This provided legitimate access and knowledge of operations. He was also contracted by the state to service remote utility stations near the forest, providing broader access, terrain knowledge, and the ability to operate unnoticed. His utility truck could move in and out without drawing attention. He was a ghost. But the deeper background check solidified Blythe as prime suspect. Investigators discovered he'd briefly volunteered with a different Boy Scout troop in the early 90s, serving as assistant scoutmaster for less than a year. Records were vague, but interviews with troop leaders revealed troubling history. Blythe had been quietly asked to leave due to unspecified boundary issues and inappropriate attention toward children. Leaders spoke of incidents where Blythe seemed overly focused on certain boys, offering private lessons and gifts, making them uncomfortable. Allegations of favoritism, inappropriate physical contact, obsessive behavior. No formal charges were filed, but concerns were serious enough to warrant removal. The profile matched behavioral analysts' predictions. A solitary, meticulous planner with specialized skills, location access, and disturbing history of predatory behavior toward young boys. The evidence was circumstantial, but the specificity of ventilation components combined with Blythe's background and access made him the most compelling suspect. The focus shifted entirely to Orson Blythe. The shadow figure finally had a name. Authorities located Blythe, now in his late 50s, still living in a nearby county. He resided in a small, isolated house on the outskirts of town, maintaining the reclusive lifestyle that characterized his past. He was still working in HVAC, operating his small business from a workshop attached to his home. The FBI placed him under surveillance, monitoring movements and activities. He appeared to be a man of routine, predictable, and unremarkable. They observed his solitary routines and meticulous attention to detail. He interacted with few people, mostly clients and suppliers. He seemed invisible. Based on highly specific circumstantial evidence, his access, and his disturbing history, the FBI secured a search warrant. They decided to execute early in the morning. The raid was swift. A tactical team descended, securing the house and workshop. They found Blythe inside, seemingly preparing for his workday. He appeared startled, but didn't resist. He remained silent as he was handcuffed. The search began immediately. The house was neat and organized, reflecting meticulous nature. Investigators searched every room. They didn't find typical trophies associated with serial predators. No photographs, no stolen belongings, no souvenirs. But in the workshop, among tools and equipment, they found something far more incriminating. In a locked filing cabinet hidden among business records, they uncovered detailed architectural drawings and schematics. The drawings depicted a buried shipping container complete with the complex ventilation system found at the crime scene. The specifications matched precisely. The detail was staggering, including measurements, materials lists, installation instructions. It was a blueprint for a prison. The schematics were the smoking gun, irrefutable proof Blythe designed and built the buried prison. Further search revealed more. Receipts for heavy equipment rental, an excavator and bulldozer dated March 1997, the same month he purchased ventilation components. The rental company was in a neighboring county, suggesting he deliberately avoided local suppliers to minimize detection. The agreement listed Blythe as operator, confirming his ability to transport and bury the container independently. In a dusty box hidden in the workshop attic, they found the most disturbing evidence, a collection of unsent letters, dozens written over years. The letters were obsessive and delusional, addressed to R and J. They detailed a bizarre, twisted fantasy of a shared life, a hidden family in an underground sanctuary. The letters revealed a deeply disturbed mind obsessed with control and possession. They chronicled daily routines inside the container, psychological manipulation, attempts to create a twisted family dynamic. Blythe was brought to the FBI field office for interrogation. He was placed in a small room, atmosphere tense. He was initially calm, maintaining innocence. He denied knowledge of the brothers or container. He claimed he was being framed, evidence planted. The interrogation was methodical and relentless. Agents confronted him with physical evidence from his home. They laid out schematics, comparing them to container photographs. They showed receipts. They read letter excerpts, forcing him to confront reality. The evidence was overwhelming. Blythe's composure cracked. Denials became less convincing. Demeanor more agitated. Agents pressed, focusing on planning, skills, motive. They emphasized the gravity and overwhelming evidence. Finally, confronted with irrefutable proof, Blythe's resistance crumbled. He confessed. The confession was detailed and horrifying, delivered in flat, emotionless tone. He admitted to abducting Ronan and Jarek. He recounted seeing them heading into the woods, July 12th, 1997, as the storm began. He knew the area well, knew about the cave they frequented. He'd been watching them for weeks, planning. He approached in his utility truck, offering a ride, claiming he could take them to shelter. The boys, trusting and desperate to escape rain, accepted. Once inside, Blythe incapacitated them with chloroform and transported them to the container he'd prepared months in advance. The buried prison had been waiting. He admitted to a chilling detail explaining initial investigation confusion. After securing the boys, he returned to the cave and tied the specific knot to the root system. He knew Ronan was proud of his knot-tying skills, and discovery of the knot would focus the search on accidental death, diverting suspicion from abduction. The misdirection was calculated and effective. working for 11 years, a masterful stroke of deception. Blythe revealed horrific captivity details. He kept them imprisoned for years, bringing food, water, supplies. He described attempts to create a twisted family version, forcing boys to participate in delusional fantasies. But Ronan never acquiesced. He constantly fought, resisting control, attempting escapes. He encouraged Jarek to resist, maintaining fierce determination to survive. Ronan's defiance enraged Blythe, leading to escalating confrontations. Several months into captivity, during a violent confrontation, Blythe killed Ronan. He admitted to strangling him in rage after Ronan damaged the ventilation system in an escape attempt. The confession was chilling in its detachment. Blythe described murder with the same detail he used describing container construction. Investigators pressed about Ronan's body location. They needed to recover remains to provide the family closure. Under pressure, Blythe agreed to lead them to the burial site. He directed investigators to a separate Oak Haven location, miles from the container, a remote area with dense underbrush and rocky terrain. He pointed to a spot beneath a large oak tree. Excavation began immediately. After hours of digging, investigators uncovered human remains, skeletal, consistent with a body buried over a decade. Forensic analysis later confirmed identity. Ronan Kinsley had finally been found. The discovery was heartbreaking, but provided confirmation the family desperately needed. Recovery of Ronan's remains brought closure, confirming worst fears, but ending agonizing uncertainty. However, the younger brother Jarek's fate remained an agonizing mystery. When investigators pressed Blythe about Jarek, his detailed confession suddenly became evasive and contradictory. Blythe claimed after Ronan's death, Jarek became completely withdrawn and unresponsive, spirit broken. He insisted several years later, around 2001, Jarek managed to escape. According to Blythe, he'd returned to restock supplies and found the hatch open, Jarek gone. He claimed Jarek somehow forced open reinforced locks, a feat highly improbable given hatch construction and Jarek's age and physical condition after years of captivity. Blythe insisted he searched the area but found no trace. He claimed he then abandoned the container, fearing Jarek would lead authorities to him. Investigators strongly doubted this account. The escape story seemed self-serving and inconsistent with meticulous control Blythe exerted. Authorities believe Blythe murdered Jarek as well, perhaps when he became too old to control, or in immediate aftermath of Ronan's death. They suspected Blythe refused to disclose Jarek's body location as a final measure of control, maintaining power over investigation and family. Or perhaps he genuinely couldn't remember burial site location after so many years. Furthermore, investigators believed Blythe's claim of fully abandoning the container wasn't entirely true. The meticulous design and construction suggested a long-term plan, a permanent fixture designed for repeated use. Authorities speculated Blythe likely kept the container maintained over years, playing with thoughts of more victims, waiting for opportunity to strike again. The site represented physical manifestation of his darkest fantasies, something he'd be reluctant to relinquish. Discovery by loggers had likely thwarted his future plans. Orson Blythe was charged with kidnapping and murder of Ronan Kinsley and kidnapping of Jarek Kinsley. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the schematics, receipts, confession, and recovery of Ronan's remains, he pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to multiple consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Recovery of Ronan's remains provided the Kinsley family confirmation of his fate, allowing them to finally lay him to rest. However, because Jarek's body was never found and Blythe refused to admit to his murder, the ultimate fate of the younger brother remains officially unresolved. The silence of Oak Haven Forest holds the final secret of the vanished Boy Scouts. The case of the Kinsley brothers reminds us that sometimes the truth is far darker than we could ever imagine. What started as a search for two boys lost in a storm became the unraveling of one man's calculated, horrifying plan. And while Ronan was finally brought home, Jarek's story remains incomplete, a haunting reminder that some mysteries may never be fully solved. If you found this story as compelling as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into cases that changed everything. And I want to hear from you. Going back to that question from the beginning, if you were in Garek's position and found something buried in the woods, would you report it, knowing it could cost you your job, or would you walk away? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one.